Good afternoon. I'm Dr. Agatha Caraballo. I'm the director of the Maurice A. Ferré Institute for Civic Leadership at the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs at Florida International University, also an associate teaching professor in the Department of Public Policy Administration. I'm really excited today to be hosting the Civic Leadership and Service Series on behalf of the Ferré Institute with a great conversation of panelists on community infrastructure. The Civic Leadership and Service Series offers engaging discussions with public service leaders on the areas of civic engagement, community infrastructure, and social justice. Our mission of the Ferré Institute is to advance civic engagement, community infrastructure, and social justice through our community, academic, and community programs, social programs. This afternoon, we're excited to be sponsored this afternoon's program by the Department of Public Policy and Administration in the Stephen J. Green School of International and Public Affairs, the International City County Management Association, ICMA at FIU, the American Society for Public Administration's Student Association at FIU, and also in partner with our other student collaboration organizations, Pi Alpha Alpha Honor Society and Students Feeding Miami. I'd like to go around at this time and ask each of our panelists to just provide a brief introduction, and then we'll jump into our discussion. First, I'd like to introduce Ian Coyle, a county administrator for Livingston County, New York. Welcome, Ian. Thanks for joining us.
Dr. Caraballo, before Ian starts, is there an opportunity for you to create closed captioning for us, please?
Yes, give me just a moment. I'll do that. Thank you for the reminder.
Thank you.
Would you like me to still begin? Okay, great. Welcome everyone. Glad to be here. My name is Ian Coyle. I am the county administrator in Livingston County, New York. Livingston County is a county of about 65,000 people. We are in the upstate part of New York, so we're about 5 hours from New York City. We're closer to Canada than we are to New York City. We are in the Buffalo, Rochester metro, more so the Rochester metro. About 1,200 people work for Livingston County. We have about $170 million budget. I have been with the county since 2008. I'm also very involved and active member of ICMA, serving on various task forces and committees. And I'm also the liaison to the college at Brockport MPA programs, student chapter of ICMA. So glad to be here, happy to participate, and look forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate it. Unfortunately, the closed caption isn't working at this time. I'm going to look into that and see if I can correct that before we get too much further. But without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Oluko, an adjunct professor in the Department of Public Policy Administration and also a housing expert. Welcome, Dr. Oluko.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Dr Oluko. I've been teaching at FIU for a few years now. When I lived in Miami, that's when I started teaching there. I have been in the housing industry for over 21 years. I've worked for HUD for 17, U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. And before that, I was in the private sector for about 5 years. At HUD, I currently serve as a regional director of the enforcement arm of the agency. Prior to coming to Atlanta as a regional director, I served as the public housing director for Florida. So I'm glad to be here, and I'm happy to contribute to the conversation.
And last but not least, unfortunately, we did have a cancellation this afternoon, and I regret that Lisa Brown, a social equity coordinator for the Oregon Department of Transportation, sends her regrets that she wasn't able to join us this afternoon. But with that, we're going to move on to our final panelist, Rodney Jacob, Assistant Director of the Miami Civilian Investigative Panel. Welcome, Rodney.
Thank you, Agatha. Welcome, everyone. It's great to be on this distinguished panel of leaders across the nation. So definitely fortunate to be here. A little bit about me and the work that I do here in Miami. I'm our assistant director for the city's oversight unit. We do oversight of the City of Miami Police Department. So it is our job to ensure that our department is running seamlessly, transparent, without police officer misconduct. So our office receives complaints against police officers, and we do our best to hold officers accountable or institute new levels of training. So our office has been around since 2000. We do really great work. We lead with data in mind, obviously, and we ensure that, community members and police officers have a seat at the table, because at the end of the day, we understand that the police department works for the community, and in some ways, it's a dual-hatted responsibility. To include, I do this obviously in a day-to-day, but I'm also officer of the United States Army. I do civil affairs work, which is really government affairs, if you think about it, in other countries. The work that I do in the military really centers around connecting with key leaders in different regions and ensuring that they have the resources they need to sustain a society. So really great work on the military side, and obviously I love the work I do on the civilian side as well. So thank you for having me, Agatha.
Thank you all for joining us. And as you can see, it's a very diverse panel with a lot of diverse interests and backgrounds. And what's interesting is when we first launched the Institute, and having community infrastructure being one of those panels, what really excited me about that is that it's because it's so broad and it can encompass so many different parts of community well-being. So with that, I'd like to go around again and just have us share a little bit about your thoughts on what community infrastructure means, and particularly in light of the roles that you play in your current positions. Ian, I'll start with you.
Okay, sure. Yeah, when we had this question posed to us, I took a stab at first a definition, then just to kind of expand on it briefly. But as it relates to my position here and what I think community infrastructure means, the fabric of interconnected people, programs, facilities, and services, a mix of private, non-for-profit, and public, that support the human capital and social welfare needs of the community. So that's kind of a mouthful, but that was my stab at it. So what does it mean for county government as it relates to sort of rural, upstate New York county government, but also I think that some of these things I'm going to mention are themes that would translate into any sort of county government, probably even city government across the nation. So for us, it's what I call wraparound services, supportive services, often hidden or forgotten about. And that usually sometimes means, sadly and tragically, underfunded programs that affect what we call the legs of the poverty stool. So here we have a program called Thrive in Livingston, and it's built to have sort of strategic planning that's strategically, bad pun, but specifically focused on those pillars to support the people in our community who are impoverished for whatever reason. So how do we kind of build those support systems up? But those are in the area of jobs, housing, and transportation. So for me, when I think about community infrastructure, those are the pillars. That's our program that is built around trying to address some of the issues we see within those pillars. And to me, that's all community infrastructure. It's other things beyond that, but that's what I think about when I think about that theme in Livingston County. And that can be transitional housing, that can be transportation options for folks, because I think when we see people in poverty and trying to sort of build them up and improve their lives in some small way or large way, oftentimes they find themselves in that situation due to underemployment or unemployment, lack of affordable or good, protective, safe housing choices, and lack of adequate transportation, public or private. So community infrastructure here is often focused on addressing some of those needs and what role the county can play in either directly doing it or maybe via partnership indirectly improving those areas for the community quality of life.
Absolutely. Would either of you like to jump in to follow, or?
Ian's a hard act to follow, but I'll take a stab at it. So for me, I tried to wrap my mind around what community infrastructure was as well. And I came up with 3 different words I think really are the bedrock of any sort of infrastructure or foundational pieces. And for me, that's sustainability, resiliency, and innovation and performance. And I think those 3 things fall neatly into the infrastructure of any community, because we understand that each profession kind of intersects in multiple ways. By my very nature, I'm a kind of a public health scholar. Did law school and obviously love the public administration realm. But there's so many ways that those professions intersect that have different issues. And oftentimes we pit issues in different professions where they may not fit. But I think by keeping the infrastructure piece together, you're really looking at how do cities thrive and sustain. How are they resilient? So how do you deal with high impact issues, whether it's from the police, fire department, or your healthcare hospitals? And obviously we've seen that with COVID. And then how are you changing, right? How are you meeting the needs of your constituency in ways that maybe haven't been done before, or re-innovate new systems so that you're right on the cutting edge of performing in ways, like Ian said, that give you better wraparound services. So for me, those three things are really at the core of infrastructure. How does that relate to my individual department? Well, for me, the work that we do here in police oversight, I always try to boil it down to, once again, three different things, and that's transparency, legitimacy, and neutrality, right? We try to bring a lens of public health and government to all the work that we do. And by doing so, it allows us to remain neutral, whether it be for a police officer or for a community member. And I think that really bolsters our level of legitimacy. In some ways, these three pillars that I have for my own department work good for cities and as well as counties too, because what people want the most is for their government to be honest. And that kind of brings us to this last foundational piece within our community infrastructure. And Ian kind of touched on this as well, and I'll add another sector to it as well. You look at your government, nonprofit, in public sectors, but also throw in the philanthropic sector as well, because when all of these individual mechanisms work together, you have an ecosystem that allows people to believe in something. And at the core of any government or foundational piece, you want the people to believe in you. You want the people to understand that, hey, when I give my tax dollars to our government, it's going to come back and benefit me in some way, or someone that I care about, right? It's in some ways it's about ensuring that the people that have the least get the most amount of help as well. So for me, that's what community infrastructure looks like.
Thank you. Dr. Oluko?
So I really like the definitions that Ian and Rodney have given, and I won't, go into trying to define community infrastructure. I think I will discuss this from the perspective of what we at HUD as a federal agency, what we do with respect to providing community infrastructure. Of course, everyone knows that Department of Housing and Urban Development is primarily for providing housing to lower income persons. But what some people will not know is that we partner with so many different agencies, so many different entities in trying to do this. We partner with public housing agencies, which are as quasi-governmental agencies. We partner with private, non-profit, and for-profit organizations in providing this housing. So, in terms of community infrastructure, while most of what we do is housing predominantly, but we also provide services. We don't have a lot of funding for those, but when we partner with these different agencies that we work with, we help them find ways to provide other types of community infrastructure, like services for the elderly, services for persons with disability. We try to ensure that any housing that's built with FHA insurance is built in areas that have the available services, whether it be infrastructure, whether it's avoiding areas with floodplains. So those are the types of things we do, even though we don't get funding per se for community infrastructure. But when we partner with agencies, we try to ensure that these agencies seek opportunities to provide community infrastructure or locate their housing in areas with existing community infrastructure.
Definitely. And I think what's really exciting about hearing all of you talk is also the different levels of government, from the local to the federal, and of course, in between, the state. But I think a part of it, as we kind of mentioned, is also understanding of who provides what and who's there to help and what services are provided, and how I think also creates a lot of, distrust in some cases, but also misunderstanding of what's available in terms of, and the responsibility not also of the public in helping to make sure that we provide, good and equitable community infrastructure. And kind of leading into that, of course, we wanted to lead into our other pillars related to community infrastructure in the sense of civic engagement and leadership, or even social justice, and hearing your thoughts on those.
Yeah, I would say that oddly enough, some of Rodney's commentary on community infrastructure sort of bled into some of my thoughts on civic leadership. So I think the hallmarks of civic leadership to me are transparency in all the conduct of your affairs at the, in my case, local government level. Fiscal responsibility, I think, is an integral part of that. I mean, sometimes it's difficult to be fiscally responsible with some of the mandated programming that you have at either the city or the county level. I know that from the local government ranks. I'm assuming that's the same case at the state. Civic leadership to me is also a leading from the front. And I think that we saw a lot of that firsthand in my county from the response to the COVID-19 pandemic, the continued response to that pandemic. But, you know, starting day one in March of 2020 for us, of all of the sort of extra efforts that needed to take place. And we're a full service organization. So we do run a public nursing home. We do have a full service public health department with, you know, staffed by nurses. We have full service emergency medical services. So those entities and those staffers were the true frontline first responder types that needed to come in each and every day. So the leadership, the department heads, my deputy county administrators, myself as county administrator, you know, we needed to lead from the front and, you know, kind of be there to support the people that were supporting the community. So I think that's important when you talk about civic leadership. And then the other thing that Rodney actually mentioned was so innovation and creativity. So I have a button here says we've always done it that way with a big red, you know, stripe through it. Everybody and lots of people have that, but sort of advancing partnerships, thinking about creative and sort of different ways of doing things in government. You don't want to get tired. You don't want to get static. You don't want to get complacent. There's always opportunity for improvements and perfections. You're not going to be perfect, but there's opportunities to improve upon your imperfections. So that creativity, I think, is a hallmark of civic leadership. And then finally, for me personally, I think for my profession, I'm glad that there's a connection here to ICMA, ASPA, and those groups who do have their own established codes of ethics. Is ethical leadership. So it's the stewardship of resources, but it's also doing it without any, you know, personal aggrandizement, without any appearance of impropriety, basically doing the right things for the right reasons each and every time. And that's a must have for me if I'm talking about civic leadership.
Absolutely. I'm so glad you mentioned the professional associations because, again, I think that is a big part of the professionalization of our public service is, you know, connecting with other public servants across different fields. So organizations like ASPA, the American Society for Public Administration, NFBPA, the National Forum for Black Public Administrators, ICMA, the International City County Management Association, and these others that provide this opportunity to really professionalize the field and bring that voice of legitimacy, but also creating that bridge between practitioners and students who are studying public service. So with that, would love to also just hear your thoughts in terms of advice to students who are seeking public service careers and how to be better public servants and better public stewards.
I'll take that one. And this in some ways goes in line with my idea of civic leadership. I try to live by, you know, two real core competencies when it comes to not only advice to those looking to get into the public sector, but civic leadership. And those are, you know, first, intellectual humility, you know, the idea that you don't have all the answers and you can learn from every person you meet. And the second one being, you know, every opportunity is an opportunity to do something good. And those two things have always kind of guided my path in understanding something. So even if you're at odds with an idea or innovating a product or, you know, finding the answer to an issue, you know, most issues that cities face are very complex. If they were easy, we would have solved them and we would have figured it out, but more often than not, they're complex. So whether the opportunity is extending the olive branch to engage in discussions that may be uncomfortable at times, or maybe the opportunity is really just acting brave on something that hasn't been done before. Every opportunity that presents itself, bad or good, is the opportunity that you can use as a leader to make something good out of it. And a lot of that comes just from conversations with people in your community, having that open ear, ensuring that you're not being closed-minded and that you're not one-dimensional. And I think that it's easy to kind of get into that space, especially when you're in government, because there's so many tried and true methods. Some people say, great leaders don't create new ideas, but they steal the proven ideas from others, or whatever it may be. But I think, especially early on, when you're trying to build a foundation and a reputation, if you will, in the industry, it's important to keep an open mind, ask questions, be deliberate, and obviously be consistent in the work that you do too, because obviously that will follow you. But at the end of the day, those are the two things that I always keep with myself: intellectual humility, find every opportunity to do something good. And I think it comes full circle to help out.
If I may add as well, in the realm of civic leadership, one of the things that we do at HUD is to ensure that the stakeholders we deal with are good stewards of the public funds that they get from the federal government. And, if I recall, I left Florida in February of 2020. And just before I left, one of the public officials that we deal with was, mishandling funds. And we had to, we went to the agency several times and ended up getting rid of him from his position. And so that's one of the things that we do. They get a lot of public funds from the federal government. And one of our roles is to ensure that they manage those funds well. In terms of advice to students, I recall when I left the private sector to come to the public sector, one of the things that happened to me was I was paid less initially. So you have to have a passion for what you do when you come into public service. It's not just about money, but it's about love for what you do. So you have to really love it. You have to really try to enjoy it. You have to do it because you're trying to do good for people, not just because you're trying to earn an income.
Absolutely. That's the difference between public administration and business administration. We care about people, the planet, a greater purpose instead of profit. But it's a calling. And I think that's what's so exciting about public service in general, is that there's so many different ways to give back and to serve your community, from administration to housing to transportation to public safety, healthcare. There's endless opportunities. And that's one thing that through the Ferré Institute is we really want to empower for civic engagement and leadership in all the different ways that people can serve. I know we're going to start opening it up soon to questions. So with that being said, if you do, feel free to either raise your hand or post in the chat as Sabrina did. At this point, Sabrina, if you'd like to either unmute or post your question in the chat.
Hi, hello everybody, can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Wonderful. So my question has to do, when it comes to, I feel like that's something that is an experience to the panel and the professors that are a part of this webinar, of how the public sector, the people that work for the public sector are often, I don't know, there's like a better phrase for it, but it's something along the lines of like, emotionally exploited, in the sense of like they use the fact that you're doing it for the public sector, that you have that innate passion to serve the public, in order to pay you less. So how do you juggle that when it comes to job choice and when it comes to getting paid adequately? Because it's one thing to put the money on the side, put the priority of money on the side, and just prioritize the good you're giving to your community. And it's another thing of not being literally starving yourself and your family, not being able to be that provider for your family, for yourself, because whatever institution, organization is, not using the fact that you have an emotional investment in the message to pay you less. Thank you.
No, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. I'll open it up to any of the panelists that want to address, and I hope all the HR departments and government and nonprofit organizations are paying attention and listening.
No, I'll take a stab at it. It's a great question, first of all. There used to be, there's a shifting dynamic over the last probably 5 or 10 years, at least in New York, and I think it actually translates and transfers into other parts of the country, where in a lot of public sector positions in years past, there was a balancing of that. You had the pension obligations, so you had a pension, perhaps a very good pension, some healthcare, usually very good healthcare. And maybe in exchange, you had a rate of pay that was slightly under what the market would be if that was a private sector comparable position. Fast forward to today, in lots of these states, when you've had pension sort of reductions or changes to the pension system, you've had years of collective bargaining agreements between management and labor that have led to perhaps cost share increases on the upward scale to the employee. From an affordability standpoint, it becomes maybe a question of whether it is affordable for the healthcare. And then you have the rate of pay, whether it has adjusted upward to reflect what the market should bear for that position. So you have that dynamic going on anyways. But to the question of passion, I don't know if that necessarily goes into it as far as like, well, the feeling is these people are so passionate about working for their home community, or that they have that spirit of public service that we can afford to pay them less. I think government's awakening in general, at least local government as a whole, to what's going on in terms of market forces as a country, and that is, what is an appropriate wage scale? What's an appropriate benefit package? How do we just? There was an article in one of the leading associations this week about how you can't just post and pray or something of that nature. So you can't just put an ad out and just expect people will come to your entity because it's a public sector job and it's so good. So we need to think creatively about pay packages, incentives, workplace culture, wellness program, additional offerings beyond just the rate of pay. But I don't think there's sort of an advantage being taken place. I could totally see where the question comes into play. I think, however, you're, apples to apples, you're rarely going to find a situation that exists of a CEO or a department director, or even down the line on the managerial ranks of somebody that is in the public sector making more than somebody in the same position in the private sector. It often, more than oftentimes, will be less.
Yeah, and just to chime in, I agree with Ian's main points. Two things I would add to that, Sabrina, is one, definitely prioritize your mental health. At any point or any reason, if you get involved in a job and it feels as though you're being short-sighted, whether it be salary or respect or whatever it may be, you want to prioritize your mental health, because that's really going to be what kind of keeps the course for you as you're doing your job. The second thing I would say there is you have to set reasonable expectations. I think working in the public sector jobs really give you a good means to support yourself for you and your family. Will you get ridiculously wealthy like some private sector jobs? Probably not. But I don't think anyone that goes into this kind of work expects that. And I don't know if it's responsible for us to either, since we're dealing with the public's money. The last thing I'll add to, as public administration scholars as we all are, is that expectations really rooted in our respective states that we're working in, right? So if we're going to work for a public sector job in the state of Florida, that looks much different than the state of New York. And a lot of that has to do with how our taxes break down and millage rates and things of that nature. So I think you can really carve out for yourself a reasonable expectation of what you should get paid based upon some of that information, and then utilize it to your advantage. A lot of people just think that the only thing that's negotiable is your salary, and that's the end all be all. And don't get me wrong, money does matter. I'm not saying it doesn't. But there's other things that matter too, like vacation days, sick leave, paid family sick leave, FMLA, things like that are bargaining chips at the table. And I think as we progress in our lives, some of those things become more important or equally important as our salary. So keep that in mind and ensure that the work that you're doing correlates not only with your passion, but for your monetary value as well.
And if I may add as well, from a personal perspective, I joined HUD 18 years ago. And I first mentioned that when I joined, I was making less, compared to the private sector. But in the 18 years since I've joined HUD, I've earned 3 additional graduate degrees, including 2 masters and a PhD. and I teach at FIU. I've published papers on housing. So these are things that I couldn't have done if I'd stayed in the private sector. So those are, for me, from a personal point of view, I've spent more time with my family. I'm able to teach. I'm able to publish papers on housing. These are things that I actually really enjoy doing. So it's not just about the money. It's about, what you have as a personal preference in terms of what you like to do with your life. And the additional pensions, healthcare, and more time to yourself to do other things that you are passionate about.
No, this is great, and I really appreciate the points that you all made. I'm going to go to a question in the chat from Chloe Little. She writes, with Miami's continued advocacy for technology and innovation, how can South Florida centers and services allow for the equitable participation of our elderly citizens? I see a big emphasis on youth employment and training programs, but not enough efforts to reintroduce the silent generations and older boomers. Anyone like to jump in?
Yeah, I can take that one, being a South Florida native. I think we got some professors on here too that probably could speak to this as well. And I think this is a brilliant question, Chloe, and something that I often ask like different circles that I'm involved in. And to give you a more, I guess, focused answer, not just the big picture, like, oh, they should be involved. I think South Florida can do a much better job with its library system. Oftentimes, at least in more developed metropolises, the libraries act more than just this hub you go to use a computer here and there. There's lots of different programs that are being structured and organized by the same people that you're saying are being left out in the silent and older boomer generations. These individuals not only give mentorships, they not only are there to help you focus your college career, your identity, but a whole host of other services are provided in library systems across the nation. I feel as though South Florida underutilizes that, and it could be a great place where we can take some of the generational knowledge of these individuals and infuse it with some of our younger generations when they come to patronize our libraries.
Anyone else like to follow up and add some thoughts?
That's an interesting question. I'm sure it's going to be more challenging going forward after this pandemic, with everybody doing everything from home. I'm sure the library system is going to be less utilized, even less so than before the pandemic. I'm not sure how you can resolve that problem. I've never really thought about it. I appreciate what Rodney has shared, but I tend to see that public libraries, other than those that are attached to academic institutions, are rarely used. In most cities that I've lived in, I remember living in St. Louis, and I used to go to, the library was rarely used. And I lived in Miami as well. I never went to the library while I was there, even the one at FIU, because we have access to everything online these days. So it's definitely a challenge. You have to find better ways to utilize them.
Perhaps sending the mobile library to the senior housing facilities to get them to connect. Ian, do you want to add?
Yeah, just the library is an excellent opportunity and outlet for the seniors to participate in sort of technology that they might not otherwise have. Otherwise, I mean, on the county end, and I think on the city end, you have a lot of multi-generational community centers that can provide that outlet. A lot of times at the county level, through the federal funding under the Older Americans Act, you have an actual agency or department that is dedicated to, ours is called the Office for the Aging, for example, Department of Aging, elderly, older folks, whatever you want to call it, but those are the monikers, but that's ours. And programming and services and contracts with non-for-profits, we have actually one that deals just with computer skills and a computer lab. And so kind of building the technological acumen of the older population is not very well attended, but it's there and it's present. So I think it's a great question as far as if stuff continues to move here in that way, how do we make sure that we don't leave certain populations behind? And those are just some small things that on the county government side we're doing in New York.
Well, on that vein, while we perhaps wait for some more questions and if any other raised hands, I'd love to give you all an opportunity to, again, just to highlight the work that you're doing and what you wish that more people knew about opportunities to get engaged.
Just on public service in general, I think that whenever I speak to students and either in the K-12 environment or the higher ed environment or master's programs that I teach for, I always reference that first of all, it's a very rewarding career. And second of all, there's so many different types of opportunities that are available to still have a connection to working for the public. So and you mentioned Agatha a little bit, but from accountants and business types to, I'm just thinking of the people we employ, registered nurses, mental health clinicians, therapists, road patrol deputies at the sheriff's office, jail guards, probation officers, people that are involved in public works and engineering and I guess the hard physical infrastructure type efforts. All of those positions, Board of Elections and making sure the elections are administered properly. That's a county government function. Emergency medical services, and then all the support systems that support all those areas, social services, public welfare, public health, the list goes on and on and on. But the point being is that if somebody has those aspirations to serve in a particular channeled area, more often than not, you can find it in the public sector. And so you get sort of, in my opinion, because I'm biased a little bit, the best of both worlds, because you're able to do what you want to do, something that you actually like, irrespective of sector. And you also happen to do it because you've chosen the public sector to do it for your community and to work for your community and to be a public servant. So I know we have a mix of people on here, but particularly for the students and the sort of the next generation of leaders, that's just something to consider and contemplate as you think about career choices, that public sector's really got it all. It's just a matter of what you want to do.
Absolutely. I always say it's great thing about public administration is that it's so broad. Sometimes the bad thing about it is that it's so broad. So it's really, there's a lot of different niches, but there really is a space for everyone.
And same goes for the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. Right now, we're probably about 7,000 employees nationwide. We exist in every state. In Florida, we have the main offices are in Miami and Jacksonville. And HUD has several divisions. We have the multifamily housing, FHEO, we have fair housing and equal opportunity. We have community planning and development. We have single family housing. We do FHA loans. So you have people who are financial analysts. We have attorneys. Since I've been a director at HUD, I've had attorneys work for me, engineers work for me. Now I have mostly financial analysts, CPAs, CFEs. So you have just about everything, just like Ian mentioned. And one advice that I would give you, though, is that when you try to get into a federal government job, be open to going anywhere in the country initially. That is, if it's something that you can do. If you restrict yourself to just Miami, that might be a challenge. You might have to wait several years to get in. But if you're open to initially going anywhere in the country, that widens your horizon and that allows you to get into the system. Once you're in the system, it becomes easier for you to find the job that you really want and the location that you really want. It becomes easier, not easy, but it's a lot, just being open to going anywhere allows you to get in. And then once you're in, it makes it easier for you to relocate to your preferred location and preferred job.
Absolutely. Flexibility and adaptability can go a long way.
Yes.
Sure. With that, other advice on for those who are perhaps looking to either transition into public service or grow?
Probably just say that the opportunities are there. There is some still what they used to call grain of the profession, at least in my ranks of people that do city and county management work. They tend to look a lot like me and just a little bit older. So that is not necessarily reflective of the communities that professional managers serve. So in particular, the association I'm involved with has done a lot of work in trying to increase opportunities for underrepresented groups to be city and county managers. Because if you look at the ranks, even if you look at the amount of women managers is still low, and the amount of managers of different other backgrounds is relatively low based on the communities that they are serving. So, we need to do a better job of that. And that really starts with the council, and those are elected officials, because those are the people who make the appointments. But it's also opportunities like this to encourage people who might not otherwise be inclined to consider that as a career, to maybe step out of the comfort zone and learn more about it, because it's very, very exciting. And we need more diversity in the ranks of the job that I do, which is professional local government management.
Awesome. We're going to go to Eduardolombard, who has his hand up. Eduardo, did you want to ask a question?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, I agree 100% with everything I heard. In a nutshell, and with due respect, I'm 74, and I was raised old school, I believe. Both of my parents rest in peace. To give yourself and your life to service in the community. So I'm just repeating every word that I have heard. I'm a volunteer with FIU for the last 10 years. And when I promote the idea to the youth of America, get involved, volunteer, get a feeling, mingle, get yourself to be known. They say, excuse me, work for free? What's your take on anybody that would like to share with me? And I foresee with an open heart, I have no sad feelings and I'm not sour. At age 57, I was downsized. That's fine, no problem. I had a second job. I smelled the burning coffee, so I smiled to the bank. Now, with technology, and it's a fact what I hear because I was inculcated to read, and reading is a lesson, that the world that we know is getting older, not younger. So do you foresee that age and technology is going to take over of every kind of job, including teaching? That's what we're doing right here with Zoom. Teaching one-to-one on a group setting too, through technology. I shut up now.
No, thank you for your thoughts. And it's interesting, especially in my role. I started as a faculty member at FIU as a digital instructor, teaching fully online classes, and that's been the majority of what I've taught for the past 10 years. But definitely seeing that transition and that shift. And it's hard to say whether or not with the pandemic, whether we're going to be able to switch back to fully to conventional models, because in some cases, I think that it does work, especially for our student demographics. Our public administration students tend to skew a little bit older, working adults with families, where remote teaching tends to be very flexible for them. With that, I would like to go to Chloe Little. She has her hand up.
Hello, everyone. Mr. Eduardo, I am one of a youth in America who is trying to stand up more. Thank you for your responses to my question in regards to technology and innovation in Miami. I asked that question specifically due to an experience where I noticed the gap, and also the gap in the bureaucracy of trying to aid people navigating, getting back into the workforce with all the advancements that Eduardo was just speaking of. But I'm also curious to know, within your respective offices and organizations, what are the performance indicators used? Like, how do you know, like, these programs, these initiatives we have are here to help, and we can measure the help that's occurring in our community by this? And I have another question. Your thoughts on cities incorporating databases to measure positive and possibly aggressive interactions with law enforcement. Again, that question is prompted by being a young person in America who was doing internships, advocating, speaking with my representatives and asking specific questions. And I found myself saying things and they're like, well, how is this supported? How do we know this is occurring or this is not occurring in your area because of this? But if there's nothing to measure, how will we know? Thank you.
So I'll allow the panelists to either jump in to address either question or also as it relates to Mr. Lombard's comment.
Yeah, I can address the law enforcement question, how we're measuring our performance quotient. It's really a double-edged sword, right? So our office, we lead with data. We use data from our complaint management system to determine where are disparate impacts of police officer misconduct and or violence towards police. And it's easy for us to do that because we do get a swath of information, not only from internal affairs, but from our own individual complaint system to determine our own performance measures. We're very fortunate in Miami to have our office, but not every city around the nation has civilian oversight of law enforcement, right? What I would encourage you to do, Ms. Little, is push back on the notion that you can't make changes without data, right? So some issues within our police system have been prevalent long before recent memory. You can go as far back as the current report in the 60s to 21st century policing that we, which was under the Obama administration that looked at how to really reform police departments across the nation. And one thing that you'll see is that they're very common. Outside of the language that was used in the 60s and the language that is used now to make reports, most organizations said the same thing. It said that we need to involve better training aspects to our police department that look towards equity and de-escalation. We have to ensure that our district attorneys in some areas, or state attorney here in Florida, holds officers accountable by charging them for crimes committed while on the job or outside of their work employment. And obviously in the city, we need to do better with our collective bargaining agreements as it relates to police officers in arbitration, respectively, and in some instances too, as it relates to firing a police officer and bringing them back on the force. The last pillar, I guess, with that would be is our state elected leaders. Obviously in Florida, we have a law enforcement officer Bill of Rights that give officers protections, and those in some ways are necessary, but in other ways it can really undercut accountability performance. So those things are pretty readily apparent. So if someone says, hey, where's your data to support the information that maybe people within a certain community or people that come from a different racial background aren't abused by police? Well, we don't necessarily need data to show that. We kind of know it. We see it. We've experienced it. That isn't a mystery. You can't tell me 2 + 2 doesn't equal 5. So in pushing back on those things, come to the table with practical and pragmatic solutions. Instead of going to these individuals for answers, say, hey, I know how we can track our performance better. Maybe we should do a civilian oversight model, or maybe we can partner with federal agencies to conduct a consent decree or a memorandum of agreement so that we can get to the bottom of this. If they give you pushback to say that we don't have the data, give them a mechanism to collect the data. But don't get too caught up in the weeds, because sometimes going on the hunt for data can serve as a distraction for things that we already know exist. So if they say go get the data and it takes you 5 years to get it, you may be engaging within a process that's really distraction, and the people that are going to be harmed while you're collecting your data, and you don't want that either. So obviously ensure that you do have some performance measures in place so that you are leading by data. Understand that there's instances where maybe having data isn't the best way to go forward in finding solutions, and then also be very collaborative too. That would be my advice.
I would. Thanks for answering the question very well. Just wanted to add that in terms of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, we have a whole division. It's called PD&R, They are the ones that collect data to measure how our programs serve the community at large. For instance, we have the homelessness program. We have a point in time count every year where we count the number of homeless people in each city and kind of look at the trends. We count by race, by age, the different types of homelessness to see how effective those programs are. You also have to know that, as a federal agency, we are wholly dependent on the budget, right? If you think about during President Carter, HUD had 40,000 employees. Now we have less than 7,000. So that tells you that in that period, our budget has gone from about 100 billion to less than 40 billion. And that's the money that we have to serve the people that we serve. So we do measure the effectiveness of our programs. We try to see how effective those programs are in serving the populations that we're trying to serve. But all that is also dependent on how much our budget is annually.
Ian, was there something you'd like to?
Yeah, actually, it's funny, I was going to mention the point in time study because that's actually one sort of nugget in the homelessness fight that's a very useful metric for counties and cities as well, sort of that point in time, how many homeless population do you have and what measures can you do to curb that number, get that number down. But Chloe, to your question as well, specific to maybe the topic here, community infrastructure, some things that pop into my mind as far as there's an old saying, and I don't necessarily agree with it wholly, as far as all the time, but you can't manage what you can't measure, something of that nature. See, I don't really religiously employ it, as you can see, because I can't even exactly say what it is, but you get the picture. But homelessness was one. Things that pop into my mind, sadly and tragically, child abuse. So we run social services, we have public assistance, we have public welfare, and within those entities, you have instances of child abuse and neglect that have to be investigated. So you have measurements and you have data points within those centers or divisions that you can utilize to your advantage as far as trying to tackle the issue, in my case, countywide, or in certain profiles or in certain areas or neighborhoods or towns and villages, as we have here in New York. Same thing kind of on the overdose addiction front. Same thing on the suicide. We are considered to be in the Finger Lakes region of New York because that's the geographic area that we find ourselves in. And we're one of the rural counties in a 10-county region, and we were on a proportionately leading in a category we did not want to lead in, which was suicides of residents. So, we could measure that. That was a metric, that was a data point, and that was a very sobering one that we needed to focus on and then try to, come up with all these services that we talked about. And then finally, the veteran population. Obviously Rodney mentioned he served the country. I appreciate that. And I thank him for his service. We run a veteran service agency in the county. So it's oftentimes we find ourselves involved with the measurement of success on a veteran's case and claim because of how long, unfortunately, that process takes. And again, I keep saying this term, but sadly, you find situations where claims are put in and the individual passes or the surviving spouse passes while we're still trying to kind of fight for that claim and fight for those benefits. But you can measure the amount of veterans served, the amount of revenues that you're able to bring back to your county that the veterans are entitled to and due for having served the country and having some various claims, of claim submission time, of how many claims you're processing, of the track record, if you will. So there's definitely some things to be proud of and to utilize as it relates to measurement. But I think to Rodney's very first point he made is not everything can be measured, and there's not data points to use to manage everything. Sometimes there's stuff on the fly, sometimes there's stuff that's gut and reactionary type things that need to happen from a managerial perspective that you cannot rely on data for all the time. But those are just some examples from the community infrastructure standpoint that come to mind to your question.
Absolutely, and it goes back to, as we were talking earlier, with transparency, but also being efficient stewards. So being efficient, effective, equitable, but also empathetic. I did want to open it up to any other questions that we may have. I'm always in the sense that if we don't have any further questions, we could always wrap up early, but wanted to also just offer any final thoughts, from this discussion on community infrastructure, and just any kind of word of advice to students or local leaders, hoping to impact change.
I have just three things. Well, I guess maybe just four. One is play the long game. Overnight successes are very rare, especially in government. We're not necessarily known for our efficiency and our speed. So bureaucracy kind of takes time and has to evolve. Recognize that government can't do it alone. Part of community infrastructure is built on a recognition and understanding that it's not just government. So it's everyday people. It's service groups like Rotary clubs and Kiwanis. It's school and K-12 and higher education. It's other community groups like that, nonprofits. And then sort of from the student guidance commentary, get out of your comfort zone. I mean, I think we find we have too much, we're not gonna just wax political here, but we have too much polarization. We have too much encampment, and we have too much kind of, the tribal mentality sometimes. And I think, getting out of your comfort zone and trying to, if you're involved in finance, go do social service sector. And if you're involved in solely social service sector, go do finance. But beyond, that's from a job task perspective, but from just a kind of a life perspective, just a very quick anecdote. I grew up in probably some of the whitest areas in the whole nation, but I grew up in the city of Buffalo, inside the city, but Buffalo is an extremely segregated city. So I grew up in not only, white America, it was white Irish America. And not only that, it was white Irish Catholic America. So I joke around, I didn't meet a Protestant white person, let alone a person of African-American descent, until I was a teenager. And that's not an exaggeration. So now, how do you break down those barriers? How do you come out of your comfort zone? I went and sought to teach at a historically Black college university. I went and sought to teach at a university in California that caters to first generation Americans. I now mentor first generation Americans of all different descents from a job skills and search perspective. So I think anybody, if I can do that, and I'm a simple person, anybody can do that to kind of come out of your comfort zone and sort of have different experiences, because that will make you a better public sector leader. It'll make you a better person.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much for sharing that.
I really like what he had said when he said play the long game. I have played the long game, since I started working in public service. You pick out a niche that you want to pursue and really play the long game. Whenever you have time to read about that. If you're working in housing, read about housing. If you have a paper that you have to write and you want to work in housing, make sure you pick a topic in housing that you write about. That allows you to continue to improve your knowledge of the area that you want to focus in. So it really play the long game in every aspect of your life. If you're in a graduate program now, make sure that any assignment that you work in is focused on the area that you want to go into as a career. So that helps. It definitely helps.
Absolutely. Scaffolding learning and becoming an expert before you even, get there. It's great advice. Rodney, any final thought?
Yeah, I'll add to that, and that's great advice too. Obviously, you want to play the long game. One thing I'll add to that in playing the long game is that no one likes their change all at once, right? I think it's important that when you get into the public administration space, that you take slow, deliberate steps to make impact. And at the end of the day, those little bits of change really add up to being something impactful. So definitely don't get discouraged if you don't see like this, large sweeping change all at once. I'm a millennial, so I understand that sometimes we want things faster. But it's really incumbent, especially in the public sector, to commit for the long game, in ensuring that you seek the little wins and little victories, and hope at the end of the day it amounts to something impactful. And I think if you can do that, and I think if everyone kind of leans into that mentality, we really will be a society that we're proud of. And I think it's really important for not only us that are in public administration, but those of us that seek to be in it, has that expectation, because in doing so, we will be better off.
Thank you. I really appreciate all of your words of wisdom and advice today. Wanted to throw it to Dr. Fraser to see if there's any comments or questions from her class before I offer
No,
some
but thank
feedback.
you. We appreciate all the speakers, and this is a public policy class, so thank you so much for inviting us here in the classroom, and we have 10 other students attending via Zoom, so thank you so much.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And I just want to take this opportunity again to thank everyone for taking time out of their schedule to join us for this latest installment of the Civic Leadership and Service Series, hosted by the Maurice A. Ferré Institute for Civic Leadership. I would like to put in a little commercial for our student groups. The Ferré Institute is hosting a student competition, the It's Up to Us campus competition, competing with schools from across the country to increase civic literacy and education. We hope that you will support our pledge to learn more about fiscal policy and civics education by supporting our FIU team and signing our pledge. And with that being said, we'd also like to invite you to join us in getting involved in the Ferré Institute by visiting us at our website or learning more through any of our committees. Please reach out to me or any of by visiting ferré.fiu.edu. And thank you again just for your time. I'd like to thank our partners, the Department of Public Policy and Administration, the International City and County Management Association at FIU, and the American Society for Public Administration Student Association. Thank you all again, and I hope you have a wonderful week and a wonderful weekend as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Take care.
It's up to us.
Thank you.